Hatchet, Chapter 17, Part 1. He turned back to his campsite and looked to the wreckage. He had a lot to do: rebuild his shelter, get a new fire going, find some food, or get ready to find some food, make weapons. And he had to work slowly because his ribs hurt. First things first, he tried to find some dry grass and twigs, then peeled bark from a nearby birch to shred into a fire nest. He worked slowly, but even so, with his new skill, he had a fire going in less than an hour. The flames cut the cool, damp morning, crackled, and did much to bring his spirits up, not to mention chasing away the incessant mosquitoes. With the fire going, he searched for dry wood. The rain had driven water into virtually all the wood he could find, and at last located some in a thick evergreen where the top branches had covered the lower dead ones, keeping them dry. He had great difficulty breaking them, not being able to pull much with his arm or chest muscles, but finally got enough to keep the fire going all day and into the night. With that, he rested a bit, eased his chest, and then set about getting a shelter squared away. Much of the wood from his original wall was still nearby, and up and back of the ridge he actually found a major section of the weave still intact. The wind had torn it out, lifted it, and thrown it to the top of the ridge, and Brian felt lucky once more that he had not been killed or more seriously injured, which would have been the same, he thought. If he couldn't hunt, he would die, and if he were injured badly, he would not be able to hunt. He jerked and dragged wood around until the wall was once more in place, crudely, but he could improve it later. He had no trouble finding enough pine boughs to make a new bed. The storm had torn the forest into pieces. Up and back of the ridge it looked like a giant had become angry and used some kind of massive meat grinder on the trees. Huge pines were twisted and snapped off, blown sideways. The ground was so littered with limbs and tree tops sticking every which way that it was hard to get through. He pulled enough thick limbs in for a bed, green and spicy with the new broken sap smell, and by evening he was exhausted, hungry, and hurting. But he had something close to a place to live again, a place to be. Tomorrow, he thought, as he lay back in the darkness. Tomorrow maybe the fish would be back, and he would make a spear and a new bow and get some food. Tomorrow he would find food and refine the camp and bring things back to sanity from the one completely insane day. He faced the fire. Curbing his body, he rested his head on his arm and began to sleep when a picture came into his head. The tail of the plane sticking out of the water. There it was, the tail sticking up. And inside the plane, near the tail somewhere, was the survival pack. It must have survived the crash because the plane's main body was still intact. That was the picture, the tail sticking up and the survival pack inside, right there in his mind as he dozed. His eyes snapped open. If I could get at the pack, he thought. Oh, if I could get at the pack. It probably has food and knives and matches. It might have a sleeping bag. It might have fishing gear. Oh, it must have so many wonderful things. If I could get at the pack and just get some of those things, I would be rich. So rich if I could get at the pack. Tomorrow. He watched the flames and smiled. Tomorrow I'll see. All things come tomorrow. He slept, deep and down, with only the picture of the plane tail sticking up in his mind. A healing sleep. In the morning he rolled out before true light. In the gray dawn he built up the fire and found more wood for the day, feeling almost chipper because his ribs were much better now. With camp ready for the day, he looked to the lake. Part of him half expected the plane tail to be gone, sunk back into the depths, but he saw that it was still there, didn't seem to have moved at all. He looked down at his feet and saw that there were some fish in his fish pen looking for the tiny bits of bait still left from before the wind came. He fought impatience to get on the plane project and remembered what he had learned. First, food, because food made strength. First food, then thought, then action. There were fish at hand here, and he might not be able to get anything from the plane. That was all a dream. The fish were real in his stomach. Even his new, shrunken stomach was sending signals that it was savagely empty. He made a fish spear with 2 points. not peeling the bark all the way back, but just working on the pointed end. It took him an hour or so, and all the time he worked, he sat looking at the tail of the plane, sticking up in the air, his hands working on the spear, his mind working on the problem of the plane. When the spear was done, although still crude, he jammed a wedge between the points to spread them apart, and went to the fish pond. There were not clouds of fish, but at least 10, and he picked one of the larger ones, a round fish almost 6 inches long, and put the spear point in the water, held it, then thrust with a flicking motion of his wrist when the fish was just above the point. The fish was pinned neatly, and he took 2 more with the same ease, then carried all 3 back up to the fire. He had a fish board now, a piece of wood he had flattened with the hatchet, that leaned up by the fire for cooking fish, so he didn't have to hold a stick all the time. He put the 3 fish on the board, pushed sharpened pegs through their tails into cracks on the cooking board, and propped it next to the reddest part of the coals. In moments the fish were hissing and cooking with the heat, and as soon as they were done, or when he could stand the smell no longer, he picked the steaming meat from under the loosened skin and ate it. The fish did not feel him, did not even come close. Fish meat was too light for that. But they gave him strength. He could feel it moving into his arms and legs, and he began to work on the plane project. While making the spear, he had decided that what he would have to do was make a raft and push paddle the raft to the plane and tie it there for a working base. Somehow, he would have to get into the tail, inside the plane, rip or cut his way in, and however he did it, he would need an operating base of some kind, a raft, which he found, ruefully, was much easier said than done. There were plenty of good logs around. The shore was littered with driftwood, new and old, tossed up and scattered by the tornado, and it was a simple matter to find 4 of them about the same length and pull them together. Keeping them together was the problem. Without rope or cross pieces and nails, the logs just rolled and separated. He tried wedging them together, crossing them over each other. Nothing seemed to work, and he needed a stable platform to get the job done. It was becoming frustrating, and he had a momentary loss of temper, as he would have done in the past, when he was the other person. At that point, he sat back on the beach and studied the problem again. Sense. He had to use his sense. That's all it took to solve problems. Just sense.